So, Leek, give us a little introduction. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
My name's Lee Marsh. I'm from Edinburgh in Scotland. I've been professionally model making for 21 years now. It was a hobby before that, and since 2009 I've been having models made in Korea.
Very nice. So, tell us a little bit when you decided to become an importer and what your goals are as such.
Well, one of my biggest customers is a guy in Tokyo, and he was doing Japanese OJ models, and he wanted to do some English models. So he asked me in as a consultant, basically. And then they had a lot of problems in Japan, let's just say that, and the OJ market crashed. So I decided to carry on with the business and put it under my own name, and produced my first model, which was an LMS Jubilee, which is an English engine again, an INO gauge. That's the scale I've been working in for the last 21 years.
Very nice. Now, we have one of your models here, and it's beautiful. Why don't you go ahead and explain to people a little bit about some of the details that you put into this and the craftsmanship and so forth?
Sure. So this is a passenger car from the Great Western Railway, as it was in 1898 during the Edwardian period. And this was a very difficult project to do because the data was almost non-existent. So I had to use basically the knowledge of a couple of good friends of mine, John Lewis and Keith Ettle, who have actually written books on coaches in the UK, because we had, I think, about 6 drawings to try and do this. So this represents a first class and second class carriage of the period. It's a corridor coach, a very early corridor coach. It's gas lit, so on the roof here we have all the piping. If I just tip it forward, so the piping on the roof is actually for the gas feeds for the lights. And I wanted to represent as much detail as possible, right down to the fact on the door locks in the front we actually have little holes. And I've said to the customers, if you're a really good customer, I'll give you the key to open the doors. Underneath, I wanted to have absolutely every detail I could, because that's what interests me as an importer and also as a model maker. Ever since I was a kid, I've always sought out the best models. That's the thing that's always interested me, the very best. There was a man in England called Stan Beeson, who is probably one of the best model makers in the world. He was a model maker for 77 years, started in about 1923, and his models are sought after still now. So that's where my passion is. My passion is more detail, and just keep improving and improving every project that we do. It's been very different for me going from working for, say, half a dozen people as a professional model maker to then dealing with a much wider range of customers, going out to Korea. And I basically looked at other importers for help. So in 2014, I met George Coase, and I saw that he was using 3D design, and my builder at the time was only using 2D. So we had a bit of an argument, shall we say, and I convinced him that 3D was the way to go. So we started to use 3D design on the newer projects after this was all just 2D. And one of the things it leads on to, when you're doing a great deal of detail, so for example, underneath this carriage, we've got basically everything that was on the prototype is on the model. With 3D design, I can now sit at the computer and I can turn the whole thing around and you can see everything. When it's only 2D, it's very difficult to know until you get a pilot model what it's actually going to look like. With 3D design, you can use 3D printing, and this speeds up the entire process. So for the builder in Korea, if we make a mistake, for example, on a new project I'm doing, the chimney base, it looked okay on the drawings, and we made the pilot model, and the radius was just a bit tight. Previously, you would have to go back to the pattern maker, have a new pattern made. If he was really busy, that'd take a lot of time. In about 3 or 4 days, we had printed a new pattern and changed it, and that was it, perfect after that. So it speeds the whole production up, which just makes everybody's life easier, from the builder to the importer, and of course the customer gets the models a bit quicker as well, which is always nice for them. We used 3D printing again, so inside the carriage it's difficult to see, but we have the seats, and I wanted the buttonhole effects. So these are original cloth seats. Were all held with buttons. So actually in there you've got all the buttons inside as well. On these carriages in the UK, they always had pictures, and it was pictures of the sort of holiday areas that you would be going to when you're traveling in the coach. In first class, being a bit posher, they had mirrors, to adjust their hair, etc. From this type of coach, one of the difficulties in making this, as I said before, this is a first, second, so in the center they had lavatories for ladies. In 1911, the Great Western did away with second class, so if you felt you were getting somewhere in life sitting in second class, they changed that and made you third class. For this particular diagram of coach, they did away with the 2 toilets and made it into an extra compartment. So when we were going through this, there was no drawings. I just found, okay, this has changed. So this is one of the things you come across during design. So in 3D design, again, that's very quick to change and change details. So yeah, that's
there we have it. Now, one thing I want to get across to the audience here is it's not a shortcut using this 3D design.
No.
In other words, the end product is still that handcrafted brass, correct?
Yeah.
But
very
what
much so.
it actually, by speeding up the process, it's allowing a better end product.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I think Jimmy spoke about this yesterday, that every single detail has to be checked. If you're doing a big American engine like a Big Boy or something like that, you literally have hundreds and hundreds of individual drawings, because the designers in Korea, they have to draw everything down to the springs and nuts and bolts, and you can never take anything for granted. So say with one project you say, okay, this bolt has to be longer. You can't guarantee it's going to be drawn the same in the next project. So you literally have to check it all. In 3D, one of the benefits of 3D for locomotives is you can actually animate all the valve gear on 3D, and the 3D drawing packages such as SolidWorks or Creo, if 2 parts are actually hitting each other, the program will not allow that to move. So you can actually run the engine on the computer and see if 2 parts are going to hit. Before, with 2D, the builder had to make a pilot model, then you'd realize the 2 parts were going to hit and do it all again. So with 3D as well, though, initially it does take longer. 2D is much, much quicker to draw, so 3D takes a long time to do. But for the checking point of view, it speeds up that, which used to be a very long process. So yeah.
Sure. And that's kind of neat. And that's one of the things we're seeing at this expo is, like, in the early days, the Japanese and what they had to do, but we're seeing kind of constant innovation throughout the years, and ultimately that's why these products keep getting more and more amazing. And this is kind of neat, because this is fairly much a new thing that's starting to be used in creating these brass models.
Yeah, it's hugely important for both the importer and the builder to keep looking at the newest technologies. So 3D printing just now, you've got laser cutting, you've got to keep looking at what's happening in modern technology. The only problem with things like 3D printing, if you actually buy a 3D printer, now the way technology is going, I think it's Moore's Law, every 2 years it doubles, technology changes. So for me, I think it's good to maybe use an outside company that are keeping up to date, because before with 3D printing you had lots of lines, basically layers. Now it's getting so good, the layers are so small you can hardly see them, so the cleanup process again becomes a lot quicker, and that just makes the whole process of making the model quicker. But companies now are using laser scanning. The guys that are doing HO plastic laser scan the whole thing and turn that into a 3D model and 3D print. So laser scanning is also a really important thing. I can hire a laser scanner and maybe laser scan steam locomotive injectors, and we can have absolutely perfect miniatures of those 3D printed and then cast.
Right, so you have to have access, of course, to the originals for that to
Yeah.
work. And of course, you're using the 3D printing to help make a master. The end piece is still being done in a cast brass process.
Yeah, the whole process, if you're trying to do quality models, is it's very, very important. Something I talked to George Coase and Jimmy about is you've got to keep going out there all the time, and you really have to look at every single component, because If the caster decides not to do such a good job that day, you can't let that go on your model. I've been in with a couple of projects before where I've actually had the parts taken off simply because they were not good enough and done again to get the quality
Right,
there.
very good. Hey, Lee, I actually got a few questions in here for you, so this is great. First one here is what type of packaging do you use to help prevent damage in transportation?
Well, the most important thing is,
Oh, look, here's your box. It
and here's
magically
one I made
appeared.
earlier.
Yeah. All right, well, show them what you've done a little bit here.
Okay, so I'll stick this out of the way.
Hey, even kids can
Just
play with
roll
this
that
stuff.
off the table, it's fine. Talking with our friend over there, actually at Eisenbahn Canada yesterday as well, my wife came up with an idea that for the high-class model, the packaging has to feel special. The packaging is really important as well. Yesterday it was brought up, why don't we use mahogany and wood? Well, then you have the problem of the weight.
Right.
So shipping becomes extremely expensive and so on. So you've got to find a balance there. So what we started to do, my wife actually argued with my builder to get this. She said, when you have a watch, for example, you open the box and you don't just see the watch.
Sure.
The first thing is you have a little tray with information and certificates. You take that off, then you've got packaging, and then finally you get to the goal. So when you're spending this amount of money, it shouldn't just be, oh, there's the model. There should be a build-up of excitement to actually get there. So what we did is we developed this idea. Basically, you have a, a tray which you take off, which has the booklet. So you have booklets and tools and things. And then you have the next foam layer, and then you finally get to the model underneath. And one of the things I noticed Lamaco did many years ago is they used to fix the models to a wooden base, so there's no chance of them bashing around. So what we did is we basically made plastic bases with pillars that go into the engine. So I like doing shows and having the engine attached and holding it like this, which scares customers, but it's to show that I'm paying attention to the packing for the shipping, because there's nothing worse. I've heard a lot of horror stories of models arriving to the customer damaged. And if you spend all that money and got really excited and it comes and it's bashed because the packaging is poor, that's an upsetting moment. And as a collector, I understand that as well.
Good.
So,
well, we appreciate your wife's innovations.
yeah, I do as I'm told.
A few more questions coming in. Let's see. Have you ever considered building a North American prototype? That was a question I was going to ask you.
Yeah, well, I think what I'll probably do is a big boy.
Yeah. In what scale?
Well, I was hoping to do probably HO and O. There's a couple of other guys doing them, but, they're not going to be as good as my stuff.
Yeah, that's good. I'm sure you'll sell at least one.
Yeah. I know, seriously, what I'm looking at doing is the Canadian Pacific Royal Hudson class. There's a little bit connection back with the UK because, of course, that pulled the King and Queen and was all decorated out for that. And I've spent many years going to Vancouver with a client of mine. I used to stay there, and I used to love going up to Squamish and seeing the Royal Hudson in steam back then. So, with Canada and the sort of UK connection as well, and it's also, for me, it's a really nice engine. I just love steam engines anyway, but it's got a splash of color. You have the maroon painting against the black and then the silver boiler. So to do a project, it has to be something I'm passionate about. I can't just make a model just for the sake of making a model. I've got to be interested in it.
And it's one of those models that, if somebody wants to use it on their layout, that's wonderful. But if somebody literally had one piece in their collection and that was sitting on their desk, it could be one of those. So we wish you the best with that. That sounds pretty exciting.
Thank you.
Excellent. Now, a couple other questions.
Be careful which
Some of
ones
these
you
we
choose.
can't ask. Do you have a hard time communicating with the Koreans because you talk so funny? You don't have to answer that.
That's okay. No, that's probably from one of those guys that does the really rubbish big boys. So
Yeah.
Actually, no. When I started going out to Asia, it was Japan first because I had a Japanese client. I've always made a point to at least try and learn a few words of any language wherever I go. My wife is Chinese, although she's born in Scotland. She helps translate often for me. She's a much posher accent.
Good. So can we hear your best Chicago accent?
All I can do is like Peter Griffin from Family Guy.
Thank you for that.
That's okay.
All right. So now we did want to talk a little bit about, speaking of different perspectives and whatnot,
Sure.
we're having a little fun with it. But in Europe, how is American prototype brass viewed? Is that something a lot of people collect and enjoy? And what's kind of the differences?
Yeah, I mean, in places like Switzerland, for example, American prototypes are really, really popular. The UK as well. And I guess one of the reasons is that it's different. It's very different. I mean, especially from the UK stuff, which has a very clean outline. Just the sheer size and bulk of American engines, and also the sort of history. It's the whole thing. It's very fascinating because it's not what you're used to. It's different. I went in 1998 to the narrow gauge convention in Denver and really got interested in Colorado narrow gauge, which is still my first love. Now that I've met Jimmy, I'm not sure I want to do it anymore. But I don't know. My real love is the Rio Grande Southern, the whole sort of rundown thing, always near bankruptcy. So yeah, that tends to be it. It's just because it's different. And it's fascinating. Nowhere else in Europe do you have engines like cab forwards and Challengers and this kind of stuff. And also some of the fantastic Art Deco streamlined engines that you guys had over here, New York Central, etc. So it's a new subject. So that's basically, it's just the differences. But throughout Europe, it's the same. I love steam engines from all over the world, but my first love keeps coming back to Colorado narrow gauge every time.
Right. Well, thanks for that perspective. It's kind of neat. I know a lot of Americans enjoy the European prototype because it's different, it's beautiful, but it's neat to see how it really kind of transcends those borders, doesn't it? Just love of trains and love of like finely crafted models.
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying steam engines, but it's the same if you love diesels or whatever, it's just the love of trains.
Right.
So, that's basically it.
Well, Lee, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It was a great interview. It was nice to meet you, and hopefully some of the people here and our viewers get a little chance to learn something about you, and we'll look up your project online. What's your website?
It's www.leemarshmodelco.com.